Welcome to video 6 of the Pro Tools Bootcamp. This is the finishing touches. Real quick, just want to say you are amazing for going through this. This bootcamp is designed to just give you a crash course in everything that you need to know in Pro Tools, but you're getting a lot of information thrown at you very quickly and all at the same time. And I know you'll probably have to go back and look at these videos again and sort of let some of the shortcuts and tips and techniques solidify in your mind. I know I would, but that's why you have it. That's why you're here. But the point of all this is I just wanted to take a moment to encourage you. You are going through this, and after you have this sink in, you will begin to look at Pro Tools in a different way, and it will become an extension of how you work, and you will be a better musician, a better producer, a better engineer, because you will then be less limited by the software. And in fact, it will aid you in your creative pursuit, and you'll be making more music. And so I just want to congratulate you on putting in the time and effort to make this happen. You're going to be excited with the result, I guarantee it. So way to go. Let's jump into this video. Specifically, let's look at your master fader, mix bus plugins, dithering, recording to disk, backing up your session, all these things that you kind of need to do when you wrap up a song. And it'll make a lot of sense when we jump in. The first thing I want to show you is the master fader. So if you haven't already created one and you just have your session like I have right here with all these tracks, let's go ahead and create a master fader now. It's going to be a stereo master fader. You only need one. Click create, and there it is. It's the same thing over here in the mix window. You can even see me talking through it. Now, this is simply like an aux track. You don't record to it. It doesn't hold any audio. You can't even send from it. But its output is set to 1 and 2, and that's your stereo output. So really, all these tracks here to the left, everything we've been recording, if its output is set to 1 and 2, that is going to route everything to this guy. Okay? So it's just like a stereo master fader on a console or on a small mixer. Anything like that's going to have this final fader that controls the whole thing. And if we take a listen to the song, we can see how riding the fader adjusts the whole volume. So everything goes in and is controlled by this stereo track, basically. It is the master, okay? So you can leave it on master 1 if you want. You can call it whatever the heck you want to call it. But that's the first step, because if you haven't already, you want to see how these levels are peaking in your actual song, because this will tell you. You want your audio in mixing, the quick tip is to not really push past that -6, maybe -3 mark. If this is at the very top, if this is 0, you don't want your whole mix to be even getting close to 0 in Pro Tools, because anything past that's going to clip, and digital clipping is horrible. It sounds bad. Plus, you don't need it to be that hot in digital recording because there's no real noise floor. It's very quiet, very good recording. So this lets you see how you're doing in the mix. Let's take a look. So you can see I'm in between that -6, -3 meter. So that's the first thing the master fader tells me is, okay, I'm pretty much in the range. I don't want it to get any hotter. So I know my levels are pretty good. Then what I want to show you is what we can use a master fader for. And this is highly debatable, but used a lot in the olden days and now in digital recording. And that is putting effects on your master fader. Now, I think this is a great opportunity to put inserts. As you can see here, there's the same inserts that are available on any track. You can put inserts and effects that will affect everything. So everything will go through it. If you put an EQ on here, all your tracks will get that EQ. If you put a compressor on here or a limiter, all your tracks will be affected by that setting. So that is powerful and also dangerous at the same time, because you could easily destroy your mix, okay? But I'll show you 2 things that I'll use a lot and just show you how you can use them, and you can get a feel for what you can do to your song. So a lot of times I like to start with a little EQ. I find that the way I mix, I get used to the certain sound, and I realize that I need a little bit more high end in my song than I'm actually hearing when it translates into the real world. And that might be the complete opposite for you depending on your room, the way your room sounds. But let's go ahead and slap an EQ on this thing. We'll go ahead and get to a point of the song where everything's going crazy, and we'll start affecting it.
I'm on an island, my shores are closed in, and now I'm sinking, yeah. I need a way out of here. Answers revealed in your word, like I've always heard. But I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know anymore. I'm finding it hard to believe.
So you can see how me adding a little shelf here, right around 4 or 5K, boosting it just, 2.5 dB, not very much. You can hear it affect the cymbals, come out a little bit more overall. My vocals are a little more present. So you can get an idea of how, wow, that's affecting the whole mix there. So the goal isn't to just start EQing for the heck of it, and this is the mixing tip. If you already have your mix sounding good, you shouldn't really need any EQ. But sometimes I find that even when my mix sounds great, I go back and listen to it and I go, you know what, it really all needs a little bit more high end, and this is a quick, easy way to do that. And you want to be gentle here, not too much, but you can mess with that. Now, the same thing is true with a compressor. You could always just grab dynamics, compressor limiter. Again, real simple. And you could even pick a preset here. Let's see. Let's go ahead and press play.
I'm on an island, my shores are closed in, and now I'm sinking, yeah. I need a way out of here. Answers revealed in your word, like I've always heard, but I don't know.
So you can see how just taking, if I bypass that, just taking this gentle limiting preset on the compressor, it went ahead and created a really high ratio and what they consider the right attack and release for something like that kind of limiter. And then I just adjusted the threshold and the gain to my liking, and it was making the whole mix a little bit louder. That's, in essence, a little bit of compression or limiting in this case, because it's a really high ratio, and that's all a limiter is a really intense compressor, basically. But it's affecting my whole mix. Let's listen again. So you could simply affect that on every track by putting on the master fader. So these are just some examples of maybe a compressor, maybe an EQ. You need to be careful here, obviously, as to what you're putting on the master fader. But the point of this video is just to show you that effects on the master fader are going to affect everything, and they can be done well. You don't want to go too in-depth here, but EQ and compression and some limiting perhaps are your most typical ones. Okay? Now, what you need to be aware of is the one final plugin that you will always need when you are ready to bounce your track down. And that's what we're going to get into, is bouncing down to disk. And that is dither. Okay? Dither is a weird word, and it's an even harder to explain concept when you get into the technical side of it. But the short of it is, if you're recording at 24-bit, like we looked at in the very first video, you are going to want to eventually bounce your song down to a 16-bit file, because a 24-bit audio file will not play on a CD. It will not play as an MP3. It has to be 16-bit. That's just the way the medium is. So that just means you have to reduce a lot of digital information of your track. So technically it gets less quality, technically. But if you just go ahead and bounce it down and say make it 16-bit, like we'll look at in a second, it's going to just cut off the rest of those bits, that digital information, and it can sound really bad. Dither is a solution to that, which basically it's a plugin that adds low-level white noise that you can't really hear. But what it does is it covers up any of that weird audio that you might get when you cut off those bits, so you get a smoother transition, if you would say. Again, hard to explain, kind of confusing. Just know that you need it. And typically, once you've got your mix the way you want, maybe a few plugins here, take your last plugin spot, come up here to dither. It comes free with Pro Tools. And I always just go with the power dither. And by default, usually chooses 16-bit, but that's what you want. You want 16-bit. You can choose 3 different noise shaping types. But again, guys, I don't get that technical. I leave it on 16-bit, noise shaping 1, and you're not going to hear it do anything. It just is there, but you want it there before you bounce down. Okay, so I wanted to show you while we were on the master fader that you're going to want that the moment you bounce down to 16-bit. Okay, but if you're going to bounce down and have someone else master your recording, let's say you like the mix, but you're going to send it to a mastering house, then you probably want to send them still a 24-bit mix, because they can bring that stereo mix as 24-bit into their own Pro Tools rig or whatever and master it from there, and then they will convert it down to 16-bit and add dither. So if you're not mixing it down for the web, or if this isn't the final version, it's going to still get mastered, don't put dither on it, okay? But in our case, we are going to put dither on it, just because I'm going to show you just bouncing down like normal. So I would put dither or power dither or whatever. When you're ready to bounce down to disk, there are 2 ways to do this, okay? The first is, which you're probably already aware of, going to File, choosing Bounce to Disk. And when you bring this dialog box up, you'll have some options. Where is the bounce source? In most of our cases, it will be whatever your 2 main inputs are. And by default, it's chosen analog 1 and 2. That's what everything is routed to my master fader for, and so everything out of my master fader goes to 1 and 2. You rarely have to change this. File type, by default, it's going to be set to WAV. And like I said, that's the most used. So even though you've been recording in WAV, you don't have to bounce down to WAV. You can bounce down to SD2, Sound Designer 2, which is an old audio type, AIFF, or even MP3. Now, by default, you can bounce directly to an MP3 only a set amount of times. With a new Pro Tools system, you have to buy a separate bundle, for a few bucks to give you that option. Kind of lame, but that's what it is. I always keep it at WAV. Now the format, this is important. Depending on what you're doing with this bounce will determine what you want. Mono summed, I've never had a real reason to use this, but it will do exactly what it sounds like. It will bounce down your mix with all your levels, but it'll be one mono track. Everything will be put together in the middle. Don't know why you'd want that, but if you can find a reason, let me know. That'd be cool. Otherwise, these 2 are ones you're going to use. If you're just going to bounce down for a mix that you want to make on a CD right away, or make it an MP3 and put it on your website right away, stereo interleaved is what you want. That means this is going to be a final stereo audio wave file. Just your typical track, okay? That's all that means. It is one track, because Pro Tools by default treats stereo tracks as really 2 mono tracks. So you want to tell it, make it 1 stereo track, 16-bit in our case, because remember we've been recording at 24, but it has to be 16 to be an MP3 or on a CD. Sample rate 44.1. It has to be 44.1 to be a high quality WAV file on a CD. Now again, going back up here to format, if you were going to bounce down for mastering, and the mastering engineer is going to generally want a stereo 24-bit WAV file, you could give them stereo interleaved, or you could give them multiple mono. That's fine too. Either one will work for a mastering engineer, okay? But stereo interleaved is where you want to be if you're definitely going to bounce down for, your final song. And then you don't have to worry about conversion quality if you have been recording at 44.1. If you haven't, if you recorded by 48 or 88.2 or whatever, like we looked at in the first video, at this point you'd have to convert down to 44.1, and then they would ask you which conversion quality do you want. always go with the highest conversion quality, which I think is tweak head on Pro Tools. It will take longer, but it'll sound the best. And then conversion options, you can convert it during the bounce or after the bounce. I always do after the bounce because it's doing so much to process your mix during the bounce. Just have them do it separately. You only have to do one button, but it'll bounce it, convert it, and then you'll be done. So leave that checked. And then you click bounce, and when you do, it's going to start playing your song in real time, and you'll hear it in real time, and it'll be bouncing down to that 16-bit file, exactly where we want it to be saved. That's the final piece. So we would say desktop, we call it final mix, and you click save, and you'll hear it go. But I'm just going to press escape, get out of that, and that's what you'll do to bounce down to disk. And when you're done, you're going to see that stereo 16-bit WAV file on your desktop or wherever you chose to bounce it. And that's all you need to do to get a bounce. Now, there's another way to bounce your songs down that A, is sometimes more flexible, and B, some people on the internet say sounds better than what we just did, which is bounce to disk. I find that debatable. I can't find it to sound any different, but I'm going to show it to you anyway because sometimes it is helpful, and I'll explain why. And this is called record to disk. So instead of bouncing to disk from the file menu like we all know, like we're used to doing, you want to do one more step. So it's a little more painful, but not that hard. And that is we need to create a stereo audio track that we're actually going to record or bounce to in the session. So we create a new stereo audio track, and I would call that bounce. And then what you want to do here is basically everything is routed to this master fader, but instead I want to route this master fader now to this audio track. So I'm going to set the input of this audio track to an open stereo bus. Okay, so the input to this new bounce track is a stereo bus. So what we'll need to do at this point is send every track, instead of to analog 1 and 2, which is here, to bus 3132, including the master fader. So everything will technically still be routed to the master fader and then to this bounce track. Let me show you what I mean. I would basically mute this click track so we don't need to hear that. I'm going to click on crash. I'm going to hold shift and scroll all the way over, all the way to guitars here, because all these are set to analog 1 and 2. Now I'm not going to affect the outputs of these 4 guitars because they're all routed to this one. So these are fine. They should be routed here because eventually now that's been routed to analog 1 and 2. But I'm continuing to hold shift, so I've selected every track that was sent to analog 1 and 2. And now while holding shift and then pressing option or alt on the PC, I'm going to click one track's output and change it to bus 3132. At this point, everything's been changed, and now I'm going to take the output of the master fader and route that to bus 3132. All right. All right, so now if we record enable and simply go to the beginning of the song by pressing enter and then record. And basically, you let that run through the entire song. And what you have here is your bounce, your stereo bounce. If I unrecord enable this track and just solo this track, you can just take a listen. It's right there. A perfect stereo recorded bounce of your track. So first, let me show you why this is important. Sometimes, depending on your computer power, if your computer is maxing out a little bit because of your mix And you may find that while you were doing bounce to disk, you press it and it's going, and a minute goes into it and your computer freezes up in Pro Tools and it says, oh, Pro Tools can't handle it, and it stops your bounce. Well, you've lost and wasted a minute of it trying to bounce down because it won't conclude with your final product unless you got all the way through the bounce. That happened to me years ago, that an old computer that was just not quite powerful enough when I got to the end of my mixes. So if that ever happens to you, the simple solution is to stop bouncing to disk and instead record to disk like this. That way, if let's say it froze up on me and it stopped right when I got to this point, I haven't lost anything. I still have the first part. So instead, I'll just back up a little bit and do the same thing and press record.
Island, my shores are closed in, and now I'm sinking, yeah. I need a way out of here.
And at this point, I haven't missed a beat because if I just solo it,
I'm on an island.
You don't even hear where that line is. It's not like it's technically an edit. This is a perfect waveform because the tracks have not moved, so you'll never hear a discrepancy. So you could technically do this in chunks if you had to, if your computer kept giving out. And at the end of the day, when you're done, even if there's 20 of these, you can select the whole thing and you can consolidate it, Shift Option 3, into one final bounce, and you're going to be golden. Now that's all good and well to have the bounce in your session, but the final piece of the puzzle is to get it out of your session because it's still a 24-bit stereo file. So what you want to do is export this, and to export audio, we do it from the region bin. You click this little arrow to reveal your region bin. With the bounce selected, come up to the drop-down box and choose Export Region as Files. And this will export all the regions you currently have selected. In our case, just our bounce. And this is the very similar dialog box to the bounce to disk. We want it to be wave. I want it to be stereo. In this case, I want it to be 16-bit 44.1. And then you would choose where do you want to bounce it to or export it. I would choose desktop. That's fine. And the moment you press export, it is going to, in non-real time, so in an instant, since you've already listened to it in real time, it'll just export that out as a stereo 16-bit 44.1 file. Now, where's the dither in this process, you may be asking? Because I didn't dither when I recorded to disk. Instead, since it's still a 24-bit session, this whole session, I kept it at 24-bit. Well, in the background, whether you know it or not, Pro Tools, anytime you convert from 24-bit to 16-bit during an export like this, it's going to go ahead and dither it down for you. It applies dither, and we'll look specifically at that in the next video when we look at customizing. I'll show you where that is, but it's automatically going to dither it for you. So you don't even have to do that. You just click export, and it processes the audio, and you're golden. You can look at our desktop, and there it is, Bounce 03. So that gives you the idea. You're basically doing the same thing as bounce to disk. It's a few more steps involved, but some people say it sounds better. That's not the reason why I do it, because I can't tell a difference. And if you can tell a difference, you are spending too much time listening to these bounces. I use it because it's more practical in certain scenarios, and you can do different bounces. You could bounce one and then create a new playlist. And then you could bounce it down maybe with a different compressor setting on the master fader or a different EQ setting. Or you could do one bounce with no plugins on the master fader and one bounce with plugins on the master fader. You kind of see where I'm going, and you could have these each on its separate playlist. And you can listen back to them one at a time in Pro Tools and see which one you like. And then you can export the one you like or export all of them, whatever you like to do. That is record to disk, okay? Now, the final thing here, once you have your song out of the session, is you want to back up your session if you haven't already. And this is a simple thing, and you guys really should do this. Back it up on a separate hard drive. Hopefully, if you're recording and doing a lot of mixing in Pro Tools, and if you've seen one of my posts on optimizing Pro Tools, I talk about getting a second hard drive, an external hard drive. And this can be USB or FireWire, whatever your computer will take. But it's helpful to be recording all your tracks and storing your Pro Tools sessions on one drive while your actual Pro Tools software and your operating system is on, your main computer's hard drive. Either case, you want to back up to a separate drive than the one that your session is saved on in case your hard drive fails, okay? Because you worked so hard, I'd hate for you to lose it, and it's too easy to back up in Pro Tools. And to simply do that, come up to the File menu, choose Save Copy In. Okay, this is important. This is different than just Save As. You don't want to just save as. You want to save a copy in. Save as will only save the session file, not the audio. So, by default, you want the latest session, but you can go back into Pro Tools 5 through 6 sessions. Yeah, you got it. I always keep it at latest. Again, what do you want to keep the file types at? WAV 44.1. Your sessions you want to keep at 24-bit because you've been recording and mixing at 24-bit. If you ever come back to it, leave it at 24. The only thing you really need to adjust is this guy right here, all audio files. This is important. If you don't check this box, it is going to save a copy of the session. But if you're aware, Pro Tools doesn't keep audio in the session file. The session file, the file that looks like a little icon of Pro Tools, is just the map that tells Pro Tools to move this loop and duplicate the loop and cut the loop. But the loop and the audio and the sweet guitar, if you record it, are not in the Pro Tools file. They are in the audio files folder that is always associated with that file. Okay? Same thing with fades. By default, they are saved in a separate folder. So if you check audio files, it will include everything. You can have a couple of options here to not copy your elastic audio files. We can look at that later. But most of the time, if you want to be safe, choose this and you will save everything. Click OK. It's going to ask you where do you want this to be saved. You would choose a separate hard drive. In my case, I'd put it on the desktop because I've already recorded this session on my external drive. And you could call it, it's by default, copy of whatever the name of your session is. And that's fine, or you can call it backup, or you can just call it the same. But what it's going to do is generate a folder called this, and within that folder is going to be the Pro Tools file, the audio files folder, and the fade files. And that's what you want backed up, okay? Because if you just back up or just save the session file and then your hard drive crashes and you're like, thank goodness I backed up that Pro Tools session, sure, you can open the session, but it will be blank. It won't see, okay, well, the audio is not here. It's supposed to be here, so there'll be little regions where they're supposed to be, but there won't be any audio in them because it needs to have the actual audio, okay? It makes sense? That's what you want to do before you move on to anything else. And seriously, if this project is going on for a few days, few weeks, go ahead and back it up every once in a while just so you have the most current version. All right, guys, that is putting the finishing touches on your mix. Remember, experiment with the master fader. Do whatever seems appropriate for you. But the idea here is to use it for global plugins, use it to bounce to disk, using dither at the end when you're going to 16-bit, and record to disk is a great option as well. Hope this has been helpful to you guys. Thanks for going through the bootcamp so far. Stick around for our final video. We're going to look at customizing Pro Tools and some fun little tweaks you can do to get the most out of your sessions.